Hey everyone, welcome to The Point TV and especially on the Learning Couch, brought to you by the Institute for Learning Professionals. Today with me I have Dr. Geoffrey Abbott, who is from QUT and he's with the Graduate School of Business. And today what we're going to talk about is really about the culture of coaching, which really interests me because I think when it gets to the word Geoffrey, welcome.
Thank you.
How rude of me, just getting into it, straight like that. That's what I do, just take over. So welcome. What I want to ask first is that there's always a big difference for me, or a confusion for me, the difference between coaching and mentoring. Let's start off with the basics, make it easy for everyone. What is coaching and how does it differ from mentoring?
Okay, well, thanks very much for the opportunity, Gerald. And that question around the coaching versus mentoring is probably the most asked question and one that probably causes the most consternation. And Sir John Whitmore, who's kind of the pioneer of coaching, once said that the difference was in the spelling. But there's a little bit more to it. That essentially, if I'm going to coach someone, really my role is to open them up to new possibilities, to empower them, to really seek to help them to create some solutions. It's a job where I'm really asking questions, opening up the conversation. If I'm going to mentor you, the key distinction is that I have to have been in a situation at a high level or higher level to which you aspire, and to have some experience which is relevant to what you wish to do in your career. So there's a kind of distinction. If I'm a mentor, I can also be a coach. But if I'm a coach, I can't necessarily be a mentor. It depends on my relationship with you.
I noticed that within your name, Dr. Geoffrey Abbott, you've got the doctor in front of you. So what did you do your doctorate in?
Yeah, it was in coaching, particularly in cross-cultural management, and I did my doctorate overseas in Central America and was working mainly with expatriate managers. I'm very interested to see how coaching worked with helping people who are under a particular amount of pressure to help them in I guess, acculturation and adjustment of issues that they faced in expatriate management roles. Okay,
so when you talk about coaching, you're really more focused with leaders and the roles that leaders play when it comes to coaching. I need to ask you this. Do you think, I already know your answer, do you think there really is a place for coaching when it comes to leaders? Because a lot of leaders I know will say, I don't need it. I don't need to be a coach.
Yeah, probably they need a coach.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that if I perhaps go back a step and look at the way coaching works in organisations now, that originally when coaching sort of arrived, that it was seen as something that was done from outside the organisation with executive coaches, such as myself, that would come in and work with the leader. And what would happen, I might be doing some sessions with you and you'd start to behave strangely in the organisation and people would think, oh, that's different. And notice also that you perhaps were becoming more productive. And as a result of that, executive coaching got a bit of a name for helping people. Often it was used for people who were close to derailing, and it was seen as a remedial practice, and then emerged a little bit more. Once people realised that it worked, then it started to become something that was used almost as a talent retention to help people, give them a coach in order to help them remain and also to be even more productive. So high performers are getting coaches. So this was this kind of shift. More recently, we've seen that, and I have executive coaching clients and they say, can I use that with my team? I'm saying, well, yeah, of course you can. So what they're realising is that what I'm doing with them, they can do with their teams. So you're seeing the transfer of coaching methodologies into leadership. And I think as we discussed a little bit before we started, often a lot of leaders will be coaching anyway by default. A lot of them will be thinking they're coaching, but in fact when you unpack it, instead of positioning themselves to explore and to empower and to open people's minds to creating solutions, what they're often doing is telling people what to do, asking leading questions and putting them under pressure. So what you're seeing is an emergence of a leadership practice which is using coaching methodologies, which is having more impact. And perhaps the biggest shift is that what we're now finding is that organisational life is so chaotic and complex that really you need to have an open mind and be curious about what's going on rather than pretending that you know.
But really the only reason a person would start to coach somebody else is when I'm underperforming.
Well, that certainly could be the case. And interestingly enough, though, although it's appropriate to do that, it's just as appropriate to do it. If you're doing really well, I can say, all right, well, you're doing really well. I'm wondering what might be possible now. But before you're doing really well and achieve this, now you've got to this point and surface these really exciting possibilities. I wonder what you can do with that. So what I'm doing is asking the question about not only here, but what about here? So there's a growth. It's a growth mindset. It's one of the, Carol Dweck has been using that expression of taking a mindset that human beings will grow given the opportunity. And I think that's what coaching is doing, to help people to move into a growth mindset, not only individually, but for teams and for organisations, which is a systemic approach to coaching, which is where we're heading. Yeah,
and I want to talk about that, the systemic approach to coaching. And look, for me, I've heard this word coaching for a very, very long time. And I guess a lot of people watching this and here tonight would say that they've heard that word coaching. But what's changed over the years? If we go back in the last 40 years to today, how has coaching been a bigger shift in the way that organisations have shifted culture?
Yeah, as I say, there was that view of a coach being external, and also I can coach you a bit the way that the old football coaches used to, which means the more I coach, the louder I shout. Whereas now coaches or leaders are realising that actually not speaking and opening up the conversation is where the power comes. So what we're seeing is the growth of reflective practice in leadership. And a lot of it is about you're getting these very, very uncertain, in all of society, in the environment, we're seeing patterns of activity and action that we haven't seen before. So organisations are getting surprises, things that they relied on before are suddenly not able to be relied upon. So what they're having to do is step back and try and get a sense of the landscape and a sense of the patterns that are going on, so that they can influence the system to a more positive and more productive direction, rather than trying to solve a problem through hard analysis. So coaching helps people to step back, reflect, and try and be curious. I mean, the fundamental two coaching questions that I ask are, what are you noticing? And then, what are you curious about? And also, what might that mean? What does it mean, but what might it mean? I use the term tentative assertiveness, or assertive tentativeness, if you want to go the other way around. It's kind of you're very sure about the question, but you don't necessarily know what the answer is going to be. And there's this kind of probing that goes on in the process of coaching, and also now in leadership. So it's giving, as leaders can't appear to not know what's going on, but they also have to understand that they don't know what's going on. So it's that tension between knowing and not knowing.
You're on the Learning Couch. I'm Gerald Pauschmann, and I'm with Dr. Geoffrey Abbott. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk to Geoffrey about a systemic approach to coaching as to how it's differed from the past. We'll talk to you real soon. Hey everyone, Gerald Pauschmann here. Being the host of the Point TV allows me to listen to people like you and me who have incredible, inspiring, and sometimes sad stories. As the presentation coach, I can help you present your story the way it deserves to be told. So why not get in touch with me via the link below and let me tell your story the way it deserves to be. Welcome back. You're with the Institute for Learning Professionals. I'm Gerald Pauschmann, and I'm with Dr. Geoffrey Abbott. Just before the break, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the coaching culture. But look, of all the models that you could go into after you finished your doctorate or after you got out of university yourself, why did you choose coaching?
It's a very good question. I had a role, a very nice role, working with SBS Broadcasting in their policy division, doing strategic planning and community relations. And I was just, after a number of years, getting a sense I wanted to do something different. So I was interested in counselling, went back to university and did psychology for a number of years, and did well enough to progress through to honours and also to look at a PhD. And I started to think about becoming a psychologist, and then I started to interact with psychologists at conferences, and I started to look at that more carefully, and I thought, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. So not to say there's anything wrong with that, it just was wrong for me. So I found a book in a bookshop in Sydney called Coach Yourself by Dr. Anthony Grant, and I wondered where that was from, and I looked at the back of the book, and Tony Grant worked at Sydney University. I thought, well, that's handy because I'm in Sydney. So I rang him up and I went and saw him, and we got talking, and that was quite clearly what I wanted to do, the application of cognitive psychology and organisational psychology to workplace coaching, and that was really clear to me that that is where I had an opportunity. So I said to him, will you sponsor a PhD to look at cross-cultural coaching? He said he'd love to, and I didn't get up in Sydney University, so I went to other universities, and ANU sponsored me to do that research project.
And hence here we are today.
Hence here we are today.
So let's talk about that culture of coaching in organisations. I mean, it just sounds like a whole bunch of fluffy words for me. Like it's just, now we've got a culture of, attitude, and a culture of, high-performing teams, but now we've got a culture of coaching. A fad?
Oh, yeah.
It is. Great. Excellent. All right, let's move on.
No, it's relatively new as a term. But what people have realised is that coaching is really a fancy term. It's not even that fancy, but a term for dialogue or strong conversations, deep conversations. So if I'm having a coaching conversation with you, I'm not only bringing my intellect to the fore, but I'm also a bit of authenticity, a bit of emotional engagement. So you've got these two things. People in workplaces, they say, don't be so emotional. I say, well, go to hell. It's fine to be emotional, provided that you bring to the table some degree of rationality and analysis at the same time. So there's this dance between emotion and rational analysis in organisations. And research has shown, some very good research out of the UK, where they observed organisations that were being highly creative and productive. And the nature of dialogue was that very much people sitting down and prepared to have the conversation they need to have. And this is what coaching is. If you think of it from a systems point of view, an organisation is really a soft system. It's a group of human beings that get together for a particular purpose. And as a system, if you look at the connection points in that system, it's conversation. So what we're looking at, if you use another metaphor, are the kind of the synapses that are happening at the points of the connection in the system. If you want the energy to work, if you want the organisation to be effective, then you need to have those firing, particularly when you've got rapid change, because you have to be highly adaptive. And unless that organisation is connected, and unless the knowledge is flowing and people are understanding what's going on, when change happens, that organisation is going to be left behind.
So talk to me about someone that wants to adopt or even start to adapt into having a culture of coaching. Where do they start? So somebody that may be watching this says, oh, this sounds fantastic. I just don't know where to start, and how do I implement it, and who do I have to get buy-in from? So what's the first port of call? What's got to happen there?
Well, there's a number of factors that are going to contribute to that. I guess the first thing is to get a bit of a baseline as to where it is at the moment. And working on some research done a number of years ago, we've developed an instrument that can do a quick analysis of roughly what you think your level of development is. There's 4 levels: nascent, where nothing much is happening, then tactical, strategic, and embedded. And we did it at the graduate school, and it was interesting. We asked people what they thought, and we got all 4 levels. Depends who you ask. Of course, it tended to be related to the hierarchy as to how well people felt we had developed, if you think about that. But so starting with a bit of an appreciation, and then you have to obviously have people in the organisation positioned to have influence. Because you are influencing a system, and you've got to look at the system and say, okay, well, if we want to move towards a coaching culture, firstly, is it something we want to do, and have a number of people that have experienced and understood coaching sufficiently well to do it. They may have had executive coaching, they may be coaching their teams, they may have done coach training, whatever that might be, and to start the conversations and to start to look for connection points in the organisation to start to change it. But it's like any cultural change process. The more people you can engage in it, and interestingly enough, because it's a conversational practice, by engaging people in the conversation, you're demonstrating the power of coaching as a cultural feature of an organisation. But I've found that you do need champions at the top. It may not be the CEO, but preferably it is. Because if you have high success, and we've seen this where we've taken areas of an organisation at lower levels and really built up a coaching culture, they then look up and they think, well, actually, this is not a place I want to be. And so then you get an additional challenge that people are actually dissatisfied because they can see the possibilities from coaching, but they can also see that the leaders that they're reporting to are not using it. And that becomes then demotivating, and people may even leave the organisation.
When we come back from the break, I'm going to be asking Geoffrey if there's any tools that we can use as a startup, or whether there are organisations out there already using some of those systems that are proving that they have got some absolutely great results. We'll be back in a very short time. Welcome back. You're on the Learning Couch. I'm Gerald Pauschmann, and I'm with Dr. Geoffrey Abbott. I'm a bit confused sometimes when it comes to coaching. There are always the one or two people out there who say they don't need coaching, or what makes it even worse, that they are uncoachable. Is that a fair comment, that there are some people out there that are uncoachable?
Yeah, but possibly because of the time and context, that there are people that in particular parts of their organisational life, really in terms of being productive there and then and being more engaged and happier, it's unlikely that they will be shifted, if you like, or want to shift. So that does become a performance management issue. If you're a leader and coaching someone that's stuck and that you've tried every aspect of motivation and helping to coach them, and then the best approach is to use performance management approaches to help them to move into a better place. And if that's done with a coaching mindset and a coaching philosophy and approach, then often the bruising and the damage that's done in organisations with people that are inappropriately performance managed is avoided. So I think that would be the best.
I think when I've been exposed to any coaching, and there are a lot of models out there that we can use, a lot of the models that are using the coaching format to be more question-based. So, what is the goal that you want to achieve, and where are we right now, where are we at, here are some of the options that we got, and what's the way forward. So there's a lot of questions that we would ask. I think sometimes what I'm looking for, do you think that there's maybe an integration between the two, where you can not only have the questions but have coaches give more feedback? Do you think that the two will actually intersect in some way, where not only questions are asked, but the coach provides a lot of good quality feedback?
Yeah, I think it's an integral part of coaching that you are, and I think the difference is that rather than me judging you as a leader, as much as possible I'll observe your behaviour and then ask questions about what your understanding of the impact of that behaviour is. So I'm providing some observational feedback, which may be through a 360, it may be through my own observation, or as a leader, if I'm hearing from other people that there's been some feedback, positive or negative, about your behaviour, to be able to give that in a non-judgmental, observational way and observe. For example, I've noticed, Gerald, that when you do these, that people tend to leave the room. I'm wondering how you see that in your television interviews, and then leave it to you to make that judgment about your skill and what you might do about it.
I'm loving the way that you're structuring that together. That's fantastic. Only two have left so far. But that's what I think the question was more about, is that it is a lot question based. So even giving that, what you've given me some feedback because you've observed something, and you're being very objective with your feedback, and then you throw on top of that a question and then ask me, why has that happened? Why do you think the impact of that has happened? What if I'm that uncoachable person and I go, I don't know, that's their problem, isn't it? Not mine.
Well, I think that's when we move into, if that's a repeated conversation, it may be to do with our relationship, it may be to do with all sorts of things. But through time, if we explore the fact that you are stuck, then clearly, eventually that becomes a performance management issue if we can't find some ways for you to engage in the role that you have.
So give me some real examples of organisations that have taken this on board, and we've got some maybe good, robust statistics around, hey, this organisation's put this coaching model in place, they were here, and then 3 years later, we can see a huge increase in the way that the people are performing, and the bottom line has increased.
What we have in Queensland is a number of organisations, and as client organisations I can't name them, but we've got pockets of performance using coaching which we can demonstrate through individual and team performance. But internationally, the International Coach Federation did some research recently with Hewlett-Packard and showed some of the ways in which they were working at a coaching culture level to improve performance. There's a very good book called The Extraordinary Coach by, I think it's Folkman and Stinnett, who have in there some statistics on the benefits that come from organisations that have been researched as using a coaching approach in leadership. Now, it's correlational, so they're not necessarily saying that you coach, therefore you get the results. It may be you get the results, therefore you coach. So this is something that's up for grabs. But my observation is that when we do have impact in getting people to take a coaching approach in leadership, then we find that the results will happen at an individual, team and organisational level. The other thing, coming back to that point about leaders coaching, as an executive coach, I don't necessarily have a stake in the organisational outcome. I'm not bought into that, except my contractual arrangement. As a leader, I do have my stake, in government legislative, but it's certainly in delegated power. I have certain boundaries and certain objectives that I'm responsible for achieving. So I'm not a passive asker of questions. I actually have a stake in the game. And sometimes not only will I ask questions and give observational feedback, but I'll also tell you what to do. So that's also appropriate in the mix as a leader coach. It's not abrogating your responsibility. From your experience, do you think Australia's a bit slow on the uptake when it comes to coaching? When people come here, they observe perhaps the opposite, that we're quite quick on the uptake. I've got mixed feelings. I think it's patchy. I think some organisations are very much ahead of the game, others behind. It's very patchy. Are leaders naturally good coaches? Some are. And some claim that they're not. We get a lot of people, we work a lot in defence industries and in mining companies, and a lot of engineers that come in and say, oh, and I can't do this stuff. And often the mistake that people make in coaching education is if you're an engineer, I say, well, if you take an engineering mindset, you can't be a coach. You've got to let go of that. Now, you're asking someone to let go of their identity, to be less of who they are. I mean, how is that going to work? So in a strength-based approach, which coaching is based on through positive psychology, is what I say is, okay, value your analytical and structured thinking as an engineer. Never, ever let that go, because it's going to serve you. And you've got an advantage over a lot of people that are muddy thinkers. Hold that and add to it an understanding from a coaching approach that may be a little bit, if you like, softer, but for you harder, to add to the mix, the repertoire that you have as a leader, and you'll find that that hard analytical thinking is far more effective than it was before. So you're actually adding rather than subtracting to the person's understanding of who they are. For individuals who, you see, I'm one who's coachable. I love to be coached. Don't smile at me like that. I'm always suspicious when people say that. So. Okay. Delusional is another word. So the which one? Delusional is another word. So I'm a delusional person. No, I think I'm a coachable person, but I think sometimes what I see is that there are so many different models out there. You know, there's the GRIP model, there's the GROW model. I'm sure that you've got a model that you like to work with. How do we choose through all the clutter that's in there, what is the best coaching approach to give the opportunity for a leader who says, I want to do this, but simplify it for them? So give me an example of a coaching model that you use that you know is effective. Okay, well, there are, as you say, a lot of models, and there's no one model that's going to work all the time. And leaders that are using existing approaches will want to continue to use them. I'm a pragmatist. I think that you use what works, and the difference between pragmatism as a anything goes approach is that for coaching, it's got to be founded on values, your values, personal values, and the meaning and purpose of that you make of your life and in the organisation. So it's very much grounded on relationships, meaning and purpose. And once you do that, then of course the methodology of coaching, there are various approaches. We've got one we've developed recently which is particularly designed for leaders in complex situations. And in the centre of the model, it's an energy centre that very much is. We always coach with an understanding of what is the foundation, the values foundation, the purpose foundation, the relational foundation that the person's working from. And around that, start through a process, we call it E-FIRE. The E is for energy in the middle, and then questions around framing, getting curiosity, getting boundaries set, and getting this idea of tension between where we are and where we want to go. Then a systemic inquiry process, using again the analytical tools that you have and whatever programs you have to get stakeholder analysis, whatever it is. Then a process of reflection back on the process of inquiry and the framing for exciting possibilities. And finally, the final E is around experimentation, rather than simply, the GROW model is wrap it up. Well, you might wrap it up, but you'll have to revisit it. So you've got this idea of, in complex situations, experimentation and play, and then understanding that execution is part of that as well. So strong execution, while understanding that what you do is not necessarily going to work the way you think it is. So you've got this play between execution and experimentation.
Well, we've been just having a look at the model there on the screen as you've been going around that. So I've got a few more questions that I need to ask, but we need to take a break. And as you all know, of course, as you've been listening to Dr. Geoffrey Abbott here, who is a university lecturer, undoubtedly, and then you've got delusional interviewer here. So when we come back, we've got a few more questions to ask, and we'll be back very shortly. Hey everyone, Gerald Pauschmann here, founder of The Point TV. Have you ever thought about hosting your very own show? Really? I want you to think about it. Now, if you are a naturally inquisitive person, then you may have just what it takes to host a show. You just have to hold treats. Now, you don't have to be an expert speaker when you do interviews, because you just have to ask questions, step away, and let the interviewee do all the talking. Now, we all know that there are some amazing talk show hosts who do incredible things by simply talking to other people. I mean, think about Andrew Denton, Dr. Phil, Ellen DeGeneres, and of course, the Big O. No, not Roy Orbison, but Oprah Winfrey. I mean, she started out with a half-hour, low-rated talk show in Chicago, and look at her now. And the secret to her success was simply interviewing people. Now, when it comes to the social media world, the big name that comes to mind is Gary Vaynerchuk. He became famous for Wine Library TV. He simply just sat behind a camera in his wine library store and he talked about wine. Gary also has a pretty cool personality, which led him to incredible opportunities. And as a result of him just simply talking about wine, he got a $1 million book contract. Now, I'm not saying that you will make millions, but who am I to stop you from trying? Come here, Jessie. Good girl. For me, well, I got behind the camera and talked to people who wanted to raise awareness about their cause or charity. People like Sam Webb and Casey Lyons from livin.org, who wanted to raise awareness about youth suicide. And Jackie Gall, a young mum who lost a child at 23 weeks and wanted to raise awareness about stillbirthing. Now, these interviews shot the Point TV to amazing success. I think these guys helped. Now, the interviews weren't the only reason for the success, but they were extremely instrumental. So if this is what you've been searching and didn't know how to get started, well, click or tap on the link below and see if you have what it takes to host your very own show. I should do a show about dogs. Thanks, Bear. Thanks, Jessie. See you on the other side. Welcome back. Geoffrey, I need to ask you, just before the break, a few people were asking some questions, and one of the things that I think is really important is that I guess when someone thinks around the word coaching, we talk about individual coaching, one-on-ones. And if you have an organisation where there's hundreds, if not thousands, and tens of thousands of people, it's going to take a long time to be able to improve behaviours and performance in individuals. So I'm guessing that there is an option then for team and group coaching.
Yeah, the team coaching has been around a long time, and leaders coaching their own teams or executive coaches coming in. I did a session today helping an executive team working across a series of change processes, and that's very effective. What we found is, if you ask people in organisations, is there a problem of organisational siloing? Most people just laugh and they say, of course there is. And the reason is that under pressure, individuals tend to retreat. And where do they go? Into silos. So you go back to the safety of your team, the safety of your division. So under pressure in this incredibly intense workplace environments that most people have, you're getting increasingly organisational pressure and siloing. If you take cross-sectional group coaching and get either, if you've got skilled coaches within the leadership group, them doing it is perfect, but external coaches working with cross-functional teams, then you really have the only way I know of really breaking down entrenched siloing in organisations. So organisational change processes and leadership development programs, we really encourage action learning groups that are taking a coaching approach, preferably initially with some kind of assistance from outside.
And what do you say about the person who says, I don't have time for that? Well, that just sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a problem because people say, well, I don't have time for coaching. But then when you look at the consequences of them not coaching and ask them, well, let's say you don't coach that person who seems to be in trouble at the moment, and you do have to performance manage them out because you don't get them to a point of productivity, then how much time is that going to take you? And particularly in government, but also in any corporation, that whole process and pain of dealing with problems that get bigger and bigger and bigger. So some coaching approaches that are continually happening in conversations, instead of an annual performance review, having a number of coaching conversations through the year, you can get in front and save so much time simply by not having those huge problems that then take masses of resources and time to fix.
There's that old adage, I'll change it a little bit, that says, what if I coach all my team and they leave? And then the response is, well, what if you don't coach them and they stay? So I guess that's probably similar to what you're saying, is that ideally, whether leaders know it or not, they really are coaching at some point, aren't they? Even if they're not in the, I guess in the scope or in the professionalism where they're sitting down and they're saying, right, this is going to be part of our ongoing leadership development program. They're coaching anyway when they're opening up dialogue, correct?
Yeah, and they're asking simple things like, how are you? And listening to the answer. It's not so much the question, it's what do you do after you asked it? And this is the thing, and coaching, you mentioned before about, well, what happens if I don't coach people? They will leave because people now expect to be engaged as human beings in decent conversations and given some say in the way that work is done. And if you don't coach them, taking that in a broader sense, then they will get dissatisfied and they will leave and employee engagement will drop.
And to what degree do you think this could have an impact on an organisation if the organisation just decides, we're just going to continue what we're doing, we've gone this far, we don't have to put coaching in? What's the worst case scenario?
Well, the outcome is, we're sort of going back to this idea of the adaptive space for organisations, and there's this tension between making a buck through doing what you're already doing and understanding that the stuff that makes you productive today may not work tomorrow. So you've got to be continually having the conversation to challenge people to explore new ways of doing things. Unless you're opening up those conversations, then organisations will die on the vine because they simply will not be adaptive enough to handle the changes in technology. I mean, this is not just technology, but in all the aspects of society that we know that are changing.
I just thought of something while you were speaking. I guess when we have a look at coaches in the sporting world, some of the coaches are pretty good sports people themselves. They're not the best sports people. So you look at a tennis coach, he's not the greatest tennis player. Would you say the same to a leader, where you have a coach that could be coaching leaders but isn't predominantly a very good leader himself? Yeah,
I mean, an increasingly high-level leaders are requiring that the coaches that coach them have some kind of executive experience. Now, they may not have been CEOs, but many executives will require that. But leaders don't necessarily, and leaders don't have to be experts either in the job that they're. If I'm coaching you as a leader, I don't have to be an expert in your job. In the highly technical fields where often we have people working, the leader doesn't have to be a technical expert. They simply have to understand people and be sufficiently smart. And you have to be, to be an effective leader, you do have to be smart. There's no doubt about that. So that's the sufficiency.
Well, with the one person that's left here, because everyone else has walked out the door.
I was about to leave myself, actually.
Give me a gem, something that I can hold on to as we're starting to wrap up, that I can walk away from this tonight and just go, that's it. That's what I need to do. This is what I have to implement, and this is what I need to focus on so that my organisation thrives in the future.
I reckon the key word in all this is curiosity. Because if I'm curious, it means that I take a position that I don't know. Because you can't be curious if you already know. And a lot of leaders don't necessarily understand that. So leading from a position of curiosity, I don't think you can go too far wrong.
So let's get curious for a while. Where do you see the future of coaching heading?
Well, I think what we're seeing, it used to be about 5 years ago, people were saying it's a fad, but we're seeing the growth, extraordinary growth. So you're seeing the professionalisation, but the embedding of coaching cultures, I think, is heading in that direction. Certainly the accreditation, professionalisation of coaching seems to be strengthening. I'm involved in a couple of associations myself. So I think you just see an increasing movement into organisational life of an assumption. In one of the things in the coaching culture is that selection process will include questions about whether or not the person is coaching and how they are coaching. So I think that's the maturation you see in coaching and organisational life. So
let's do something quickly as we slowly start to wrap up. I want you to give me a little bit of coaching, just as a quick little activity, quick little exercise. And where would you take me? So from here, the Point TV, on the Learning Couch, the Institute for Learning Professionals, how would you start off a conversation with me?
I'd start off with my the coaching conversation I really like is I simply ask the question, Gerald, what would you like to think about?
Professionally. I would like to think about the sustainability of learning, whether actually learning is providing some sort of, future for people to want to continue doing it. That's what I'm thinking. Whether learning is important nowadays.
Okay. And how's that important to you at the moment?
Well, it's not, because I think we take learning so far and then we relearn and then we sometimes overlearn. And then do we then learn something new? So I get confused whether I should be learning new things for the sake of just learning, or whether I should be implementing new activities so that it embeds my new learning.
Okay. So where do you see that going in terms of your own thinking of that?
You see, this is what gets hard. No, seriously, this is what gets hard, because I think that the overthinking for me now says I'm overthinking my thoughts, if that makes sense. So when I'm thinking, and just as we take a break here, I'm thinking about, Kyle, my next door neighbour. Kyle, his truckie, and he sort of if you were asking him these questions, he'd go, shit, mate, Jesus, I don't know what you're talking about. And I just sometimes think the earlier question that we asked around, coaching was a lot around questioning. But what happens in this place here where I don't know how to answer? What do I do? What happens then?
Well, it's rarely that we get stuck. That the other thing, if we had another 7 minutes, we could simply use some silence and allow something to happen. May not impress Kyle, but that's.
But Kyle would love that, because what Kyle's on the clock. So he just thinks, I'm loving this. I love this silence. We'll just keep going this till lunchtime, and then I'll come back and we'll sit in the room again for another 7 minutes. So that's where only my confusion is when it comes to coaching at such a high level, at the executive coaching level, is that I am coachable, but I get stuck sometimes of where the direction would be heading.
Well, on Thursday I go into a different role. I'm coaching the automotive industry, and it's very likely I'll be sitting down, not in a comfortable chair, but in a workshop, and coaching perhaps a young mechanic who has never been to university and doesn't want to go to university. So clearly, I don't think I'd start with, what would you like to think about?
No. Yeah.
I don't think I'd start there. I'd say, how are you going? What's going on in the shop at the moment?
So why don't you start that with me?
Well, you look as though you may be more interested in the what do you want to think about one.
Fooled you. And I guess that's the role that people play. I mean, that's the role that we're in. If a person you're talking to is a CEO, you're obviously going to open up with a high level question. If a person who's sort of like on the shop floor, no disrespect, Kyle, but you're on the shop floor, man. You'll get a how you going, Kyle. We're not going to ask you about your thinking because you don't think. Anyway, so I guess that's what's really hard about those sort of questions.
The difference is the guy who's the mechanic sitting on the floor, and there was one, the last visit I did, we got into some extraordinarily deep thinking. But the introduction and the way in which you connect with the person, you start where the client is. You don't, if I start there or there or there or there and you're there, I'm going to miss you.
Yeah.
So I've got to start where you are.
I'm actually really fascinated about this, and I've had this great conversation with Dr. Geoffrey Abbott over the last 40 minutes. We're going to stick around. You have to go, but we're going to stick around and do some activity around the coaching model, what Jeff's been talking about. But we'd love to see you back here on the Learning Couch. And if you would like to be a part of the Learning Couch at any single time, all the links are on the screen. I'm going to leave also Jeff's details on the screen where they can contact you. Will that be okay?
Sure.
They can just spam you and just get onto you and, hey,
Absolutely.
Jeff, come to my organisation. There's 100 Kyles here that you need to talk to. So we're going to leave all his details on the screen. We want to thank you so much for being part of this. I'm Gerald Pauschmann on the Learning Couch. See you soon.